Welcome to the IAM Winter Solstice Symposium.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, everyone. I'm Carol Woodliff. I'm a shaman and I'm a storyteller, but a storyteller pretty much my whole life. And so I'm excited to be here in the Wind Clan today to talk about story and our personal story, and to do a journey later on about how we can transform our story in a way that's really helpful to us. But before we begin, what did I do? There it is. I'd like to open some sacred, just do a short prayer to open sacred space so that we work in this sacred container. I call upon the winds of transformation and creativity to be with us, to work with our story, to help us change our relationship to our stories so that they are medicine for the world, so that we're not stuck in a story that keeps us repeating patterns, both personally and in the collective. I call upon Mother Earth to ground us and help us plant those seeds of our new becoming. I look to the heavens and I ask the great creator, that divine spirit, to work with the spark of creativity within us so that we too may be creators of the new story of the new earth. We gather together, those of us who are on this live video and those who are joining perhaps later, listening to a replay, with the intention of diving deep into our stories so that they may help us birth a new life, a new earth, a new being, that they may be blessings for us and blessings for the collective. And so it is. So what we're going to do today, okay, Renee says we need to be a little bit louder. Let's see. Renee, can you give me a thumbs up if this is better? Let me know. Otherwise, I will have to tweak some settings. Otherwise, let's see if I can change this a little bit. How's that now? Otherwise, I'll just try to speak a little bit louder if that isn't working. How are we doing? Okay. Thanks, Kathleen. I appreciate it. So I've got some notes here because I want to keep this really tight and on track. And this is the power of storytelling, and the power of our story is something I'm so passionate about. I could keep talking and go in all sorts of directions. So I'm trying to keep myself focused and not do a lot of wandering, because otherwise we could be here all day. So today, I want to talk just briefly about story and why it's important, and why there are powerful stories that we need to share, and sometimes why we need to look at our stories and see where they're keeping us stuck. Then I want to do a quick little, what I call stirring the pot exercise, which is not an in-depth journeying exercise, but is just an idea about different stories you may want to work with when we go into journey. So I'm going to ask some questions, and you can scribble your answers down on a piece of paper if you want, so you can have a journal with you, or you could just think about them, because it's not really important that you get a whole journal out of that exercise. The real meat is going to be when we dive into the actual journey, and I'll talk more about the journey when we get there. So as I said, I love storytelling and I love stories. And my mom and my dad and my older sister, who's 8 years older than I am, read to me from when I was a baby, and it instilled in me a love of reading and a love of stories. to this day, when I pick up a book, I feel like I'm in that family love, because my family loved reading and stories so much. And as a little girl, I wrote stories. We were cleaning my mom's house out when she had a stroke and needed to move into a more assisted living situation, she had saved all these little books that I made, that I wrote when I was a little girl. And so in that, I knew that my mom honored my storytelling and my stories, and that's something that many of us didn't get. So we need to come into this place of honoring and looking at our stories, light and dark. Are there stories that are dark, that are keeping us in an old wound, an old pattern of the horrible stuff that might have happened to us, that we just haven't been able to transcend and get it to a place where it's just a fact, not an emotion-laden story that something happened and it changed the trajectory of our life. But how do we do that if we're stuck? So I feel like storytelling, it can be a healing and inspirational art. It is something that can connect us, it can teach us, it can inspire us. Sorry, it's mailman time and my dog is really ready. Luna, enough. I knew this would happen. He normally doesn't come till like noon, but today, of course, he'll be early, so the little dog will have a moment to have to tell us all about the mailman coming. But in my shamanic practice, healing work is often energetic, but it's also about the story. It's also about helping people change the relationship through ceremony and ritual and deconstructing their story. So it's really important for us as we enter this new age, as we come into this time of solstice, where we can look at the story and go into depth about what stories serve us today and what stories no longer do, and what do we want to change. And I wrote a little something about my story and how I would like to put my story out into the world. And I'd like to read it to you because I didn't have time to get it memorized, so I'm going to read this. If I were to share my true story, it would be about how powerful and fragile I am. I would be brave and expose it all so that I was transparent to the point of having nothing to hide. I would share heartbreaks, disappointments, and silly things that I thought made me different than others. And some might judge me for that. And others might say, "Oh my, I didn't know that that was me too." And of course, pages got out of order. And so we accept the humanness and the fragility of us being human as we work with this. That's so funny. Here we go. I would share the magic and mystery of my soul and connect to Mother Earth and Great Spirit, not to boast, but so that we could revel in the joy and power of that which is available to us. Those connections which our souls are begging us to claim. I would tell them in stories to inspire, uplift, and connect us, to let you know that you are not alone. The soul stories tell us to put away shame and embrace the soul's power for growth. Stories such as these have started revolutions. And we are in a time of evolution and revolution, my friends. It's time to look at the stories that are not working and take them to the fire and write new ones. It's time to honor our stories, the dark and the light, and make peace with them and to envision better stories for ourselves and for our collective future. So I'm hoping today our time together will be a beginning, an inspiration for you to go deeper and connect with your soulful story, the story that your soul wants you to help evolve in the world. It's medicine, it's truth, it's mythic, it's needed. When I think of stories, I think of them as beings that we usher forth through the veil when we call to them. Some of them are joyful to dance with, and some not so much. Some take us places into the shadow side of our being. And today we want to be in the noticing of what our stories are, collective and individual. You know, stories help us make sense of the world. Stories are not just a recounting of the events that happened. They are our way of relating to it. Stories we retell in our heads have meanings and emotions. They can be friends that help us make sense of the world. They can help us grow and open to new possibilities, or they can keep us safe. And I'm not a big believer in placing blame on the stories we've held in the past. I'm a big believer that we update our stories to bring us into the current moment and expand what's possible for you and for our world. And so I would ask you, don't judge your stories that helped you survive and make sense of the world. Just ask, does the story fit the you your soul is calling you to be now? You know, our styles evolve. You know, like to use a clothing analogy, if a clothing doesn't fit your body or your style anymore, you give it away and you move on. Some of us have a hard time even letting go of the old clothes in the back of the closet, and an even harder time letting go of our old stories. But if the stories don't fit us anymore, we revise them and we let them go. If we are called, we must keep revising our stories until perhaps we don't need a story at all. It just becomes facts. This happened and then this happened, but there's not the charge or the deep meaning around it. But only we can do our journey. Everyone's different, and we work in this alchemical, magical place of mystery and discovery. If our souls want expansion and fulfillment, our stories need to evolve too. So let's check in on our story. And I'm going to do that quick journaling piece that is just kind of like a popcorn share, where you just write, as I ask these questions, you write what calls to you. What is it that stories that might start to stir up? And as I said, we're just going to stir the pot here. We're going to use the energy we're stirring, whether that's feeling Carol's moving too fast and there's a story of perfection here because I have to get it right. Whatever that story is, we're just going to notice and stir the energy of that story. So if you have your journal there, you can make notes, or you can just sit in the energy and notice what bubbles up, what popcorns up as we ask some of these questions. So where in your story were you told that you were too something? Too loud, too shy, too smart, not smart enough, challenged. Where were you too? Just think about that for a minute. Hold the energy of being too much for this world, too much for your family, too much for other people. What words stalk you? What words are the words that you have to visit again and again? Perfectionist. Let's see. I always have to do the right thing. Unworthy. Not good enough. Just notice, and notice where they sit in your body. Are there stories of regret? Shoulda, woulda, couldas. Just notice those. Stories about being good at something but not wanting to brag. Some gift or talent you have that you might not want to own. A heartbreak. A moment you were so disappointed or so in grief. Maybe it's your first heartbreak, maybe it's a recent heartbreak. Just notice the energy of what that story might be. Something really difficult you did, but that you're really proud of. A repeating pattern you'd like to shift. Let's switch out to the bigger world. What's a story you see repeating in the world that you would like to change? And anything else about your personal story that you notice just as we're working right now? Okay. So the idea of these questions is not for you to write out a long journaling exercise about those questions. It is for you to be with the energy of where your story is. And now we're going to go into a journey, and I'm just going to give you some preliminary instructions beforehand. For those of you who are comfortable with journeying, if you have a rattle or drum and you want to journey along with me, that's great. If you aren't comfortable with journeying or haven't done a lot of journeying, don't worry. However you show up, whatever your imagination and your soul and spirit lead you to in this exercise is fine. I'm going to guide you, but I'm times of silence with just the rattle so that you can experience your own journey and your own insights. So take a few minutes to breathe while I talk about the instructions and tell you a little bit about where you're going to go. I always think it's helpful to just outline what the journeying is going to be. So we're going to take a journey to a cave, and we're going to go into several chambers. And the first chamber is going to be the chamber of your current stories or the past stories. And we are going to take those stories to the fire. You may come out of the fire with that story transformed. You may know that that's a story you need to keep for now, or it may be a story that you completely let go. It's up to you and where you are in your process. Then we are going to call forth new stories, and we're going to see what spirit in this journey wants you to have as far as the new story for you, for this new age, and what story for the collective you want to call forth. And we're doing this all from a place of honoring where you were in the past and where the story served you is perfect. It's not something we want to beat ourselves up for. So let's get settled. Take a few nice deep breaths. And imagine you are walking in a meadow. And you're walking towards a river. Notice the flowers or the grasses along the path. Hear the river in the distance. Walk to the river. And it's our intention to float in that river to the cave. If you're comfortable just getting in the river and floating on your back, do that. If you need a flotation device or a boat to take you to the cave, depending on your comfort, do that. Get in the river and begin your journey gently floating along, staring up at the sky, noticing on your periphery the trees or plants that are alongside the river. Floating, drifting down. And as you float, the river drops gently and turns a bend and enters a cave. And there's a big chamber with banks on the side of the cave, and there's a guide waiting for you there. The guide gives you a dry cloak or new clothes to change into so that you'll be comfortable on your journey. And after you've changed, the guide escorts you to the first chamber, the chamber of stories. And here you sit and notice your stories, the energies that you've begun to unearth. You call upon those beings, those stories to come to you, to come back from the missions you might have sent them on, to be present with you now, with gratitude for the service they have done. You may notice particular stories, or you may just be in the energy of the collective story you have been living. And the guide taps you on the shoulder and says, it's time to go to the fire. and escorts you to a new chamber with a beautiful open ceiling and a beautiful fire already made for you. And you know it's safe to begin to put those old stories or the stories of transformation and letting go into the fire. There are fire tenders keeping the fire going and creating sacred space for you to do this work. Allow yourself to put the stories into the fire in the way that feels right for you. It could be blowing their energy into sticks by fireside, or simply blowing the energy from your heart into the fire. And the guide taps you on the shoulder and says you're always welcome to come back to the fire. But for now, it's time to move on. And he takes you to the chamber of new stories. And this cave is actually open to the outside. You can see the stars above, and you can call back from the stars the seeds of the new story. You can ask those beautiful star beings to plant the seeds of your new becoming and the new becoming of our world in your heart. Spend some time feeling the energy of the new stories coming in. Noticing what those might be for you and what energy you hold for our world. And the guide taps you on the shoulder again and escorts you out. And magically you are on a path back through the meadow. You thank the guide for his or her service. The guide says you are welcome back at any time and encourages you to grow the seeds of those new stories because they are so needed in our world right now. Journeying back to this time and place, taking a few nice deep breaths and noticing any ahas, making any notes you want to make for yourself. Welcome back. I encourage you to write your stories in a journal, and you get to choose who you want to share them with. Some people hold their stories very privately. I think we're at a time right now where we need to share more collective stories. We need to be with each other, but perhaps that's just sharing with one friend. Finding someone you trust that you can hold your stories with, or maybe you're called to be much bigger than that. Maybe you're called to write a book or to share stories in a story time setting, like sharing a story via video. And if you're called to do it, if that's part of your soul expansion, I would encourage you to do so. I love the power of story. You know, shamanic wisdom has been shared via story throughout humankind. And stories are the way that spiritual books are often given, spiritual teachings are often given. So becoming really comfortable with our own personal stories and then allowing that bigger story to flow through us is an important part of understanding how we can hold light in the world. So it's been my honor to work with you today and to offer this for you. And I hope you have a good day, and I will monitor the comments and answer questions if there are any, or just I would love to hear a little bit about your journey. So if you have any ahas, any insights, anything about the journey you want to share, I will absolutely look for those. All right. Thank you. And have a blessed weekend, and may your stories fuel your soul expansion and sit well in your heart. Thank you.